Then I should introduce Dr. Kazuhiko NAKAMURA, legal advisor and the Director General of the International Legal Affairs Bureau. Up until 2 days ago, he was Director General of Global Issues Division. And he will talk about Japan and the next ATCM. Please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. And maybe one short explanation about my title. So as introduced by Dr. Shin, I used to be the Director General for Global Issues up till the day before yesterday, namely the DG in charge of the Antarctica issues. And when I was offered to sit here and speak in this seminar, I thought I would be in that post for at least another 1 year at least. So that is why I accepted that role. But since then, it was in a very short notice decided that I would move to another function as the legal advisor. So today, so let me be clear that I speak in front of you as the former Director General for Global Issues, which means that what I speak in front of you reflects a sort of in-house brainstorming within the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs as regards the preparation for the ATCM 48 in Hiroshima, which will take place in 2026, but the status as of 16th of January. So, and it is upon with that understanding that I immediately jump into the subject. On this page, I wrote many things, but maybe the few things I should draw attention on this page is that at the very first part, when the Antarctic Treaty entered into force in 1961, the parties were of number of 12, and among which Japan was there. But now, as of December 2024, the number of contracting parties has increased to 58. So, which logically makes a big difference in the composition, nature, and probably the working methods within the Antarctic Treaty System. That is one thing. And although it is not written in this slide, since 1961 up till now, so during the a little bit more than 60 years, the world has changed significantly. Politically speaking, the Antarctic Treaty was born in the midst of the Cold War era. But since then, we have experienced the post-Cold War period. And then now I can say that we are in the post-Cold War period, which is characterized by the global governance structure, I can say, in flux, fluidified, various challenges, which some of them are understandable and justifiable, but some others which cannot be justified. And the current period of post-Cold War is also characterized by the resurgence of geopolitical divides and confrontations in many parts of the world. And another important change since 1961 up to now is that we have identified many new global issues, some of which are actually identified and discovered thanks to the Antarctic scientific knowledge, such as ozone layer depletion, some endangerment of some species, or global warming, climate change, and marine pollutions, for example. And not only we have discovered those new global issues, but also we are realizing more and more that those different global issues are actually very closely, I would say, intertwined, mutually related to each other. And in that sense, the global challenges have realized as becoming more and more complex. So it is in these two global trends that Japan will sit as vice chair at ATCM 47 in Milan in June 2025 this year. And next year, 2026, we will host ATCM 48 in Hiroshima. And so that leads us logically to think about what we should aim for as to the possible role or the function of the Antarctic Treaty System in this specific context. Talking about, first of all, the mid to long-term agenda objectives, maybe I can point out here three important elements to be taken into consideration. Firstly, Japan thinks that Antarctic Treaty System should be and should remain future-oriented. And secondly, in order to be continue to be future-oriented, the Antarctic ATS should help to address the deepening divides and confrontations in the international community I've just mentioned. And thirdly, at the same time to addressing those divides and confrontation, the ATS should also address increasingly complex global issues, what I've just mentioned. And when I mean, a Japanese Minister of Foreign Affairs compares such consideration with the key issues which was actually discussed at the latest ATCM 46, which took in India. Even at the first glance, we identify at least some issues discussed which are closely related to the consideration I've just mentioned. For example, the very last one, designation of emperor penguin as a specially protected species, is definitely related to the protection of environment species, namely to the solution of global issues. I can say the same about the education and outreach activities, which largely contribute to finding solutions to global issues. On the other hand, some of those, at least one of these issues, kind of suffer from the aggravating divides and confrontations in the world, namely the consideration of consultative party status. Although I would not enter into this subject at this stage, we are definitely aware of that. And although I personally am not very familiar with the details and historics of discussions about the designation of emperor penguin as SPS, this issue might, I imagine, be impacted also by such geopolitical divide or confrontations. With that said, at this stage, very preliminary, I would like to elaborate a little bit. So what we, Japan, intends to pursue in Hiroshima in 2026. We think that the key word could be back to the basics. Back to the basics means to back to the basics of the Antarctic Treaty. So namely, maybe it is time to read carefully again the different provisions of the Antarctic Treaty and reconfirm the important provisions, principles figuring therein, with the objective of engaging all the 58 contracting parties and all the 29 consultative parties to align with those principles or provisions. In other words, we think it important to really going back to the basics of the Antarctic Treaty so that no single contracting party can resist or deviate or negate the activities or cooperations based on those provisions. And from that perspective, Japan at this stage identifies the three most important, I can say, principle, which transcends and forms the really basis of the Antarctic Treaty System. First is the principle of the use of Antarctica for peaceful purposes only. And the second one is the science-based international cooperation. And thirdly, the Antarctic Treaty System should contribute to address global environmental issues, particularly by sharing and disseminating scientific expertise. Of course, there are some other measures or achievements that are done, which might not be directly related to either of these three principles. And those other measures, policies should definitely also be pursued. And that is really the brief, very brief summarizing of what Japan intends, but I will elaborate each of them a little bit. Starting by the use for peaceful purposes only. I here quoted a part of the provisions of Article 1 of the Antarctic Treaty. Here, maybe I would like to highlight from the first and second sentence line of paragraph 1 of Article 1, which reads, "There shall be prohibited inter alia any measures of a military nature." So no military action shall not take place on Antarctica, and actually has not taken place, if my understanding is correct. And this Article 1 is complemented by several other important provisions, such as Article 4, so which sort of has frozen, I can say, the territorial claims of different parties, and in so doing, by so doing, which have prevented the race for territorial gains, at least on the Antarctic continent and maritime areas. And there is also another important article, which is Article 5, which excluded a kind of nuclear explosion or any other nuclear activities, I would say, on the Antarctic continent, which definitely prevented and excluded the nuclear war or any other strategic nuclear competition on the Antarctic continent. And all those provisions have, I believe, contributed to the stabilization or prevention of geopolitical strategic device confrontations throughout the international community. At least it was completely excluded from the Antarctic areas, which must have definitely served in mitigating such tensions worldwide in other regions. And I think with the kind of symbolic fact of the meeting taking place in Hiroshima, so we should highlight this aspect and this message in the forthcoming ATCM 48, which I hope will help to send a message that we, the contracting parties to the Antarctic treaties, are actually stabilizing or mitigating the global divide confrontations, and which will also remind us that not only we are doing that, but we should do that, and which I believe the important aspect in relation to other two principles that I will elaborate. And now I move on to the second principle, which is science-based international cooperation. Here, the important article is Article 2, which highlights both the freedom of scientific investigation as well as the cooperation towards such scientific investigation. So there are, at the same time, freedom of scientific activities on the one hand, but also that those activities should involve international cooperation. And I think it's worth really highlighting among us. And there's several other important provisions too. Information exchange is also highlighted, and which I believe should be promoted and enhanced in accordance with Article 7, Paragraph 5, relating to the exploration, and more generally, it is referred to in the chapeau of Article 9, Paragraph 1. And education and outreach activities should be also promoted because shared scientific knowledge is precisely the basis for the international cooperation in scientific researches and activities. And with all that said, I believe that, and I hope that we should deal with the consultative party status application issues also in the spirit and in the light of these two important principles, namely freedom of scientific investigation on the one hand, but also cooperation on the other. So we all know that during the past few years, the discussions were difficult in this respect, but I hope that whether we can shed a new light on these discussions by really focusing on objectively assessing scientific research activities of the applicant parties, and also focusing also on their international cooperation aspects, namely that even though scientific activities are deployed by a specific party, if such scientific activities are conducted by that party alone or with a limited number of parties without sharing sufficient information with other more broader parties, that fact I think should be taken into account in the discussions. And to put it in very short word, the discussions should take place with objectivity and transparency. So, which will, I believe, maintain and even strengthen the credibility of the ATCM. And now move on to the third principle, which is the contribution to addressing global environmental issues. Here at the onset, Japan believes that introduction of new measures or systems should be a means, not to an end. So we should not pursue to create a beautiful symbol or trophy, but we should now more than ever really concentrate on crafting and introducing practical and pragmatic measures to really meaningfully change the behaviors of the relevant stakeholders. And from that perspective, again, Japan believes that the publishing and sharing of the scientific research outcomes could be the key, particularly to raise awareness throughout the world. And it is precisely for that purpose that Japan thinks it important to highlight and put an emphasis on promoting practical, pragmatic cooperation with other relevant international organizations or frameworks, of some of which I listed here. SCAR, CAMLR, it goes without saying, very clear. IPCC also, because it deals with the climate change, global warming. And Arctic Council too. If I understand correctly, the ATCM has once had kind of joint session type collaboration, but maybe we should explore even further cooperation in other modalities. Very briefly on the BBNJ agreement, it has not yet entered into force, first of all. And I'm aware that there is a debate, including the resistance or hesitation of at least some parties of the Antarctic Treaty. But here again, once the BBNJ agreement enters into force, I believe the Antarctic Treaty System should explore some pragmatic cooperation or collaboration. And to continue on this third aspects, maybe some of the ongoing discussions or subjects we are dealing with during the past ATCM meeting recent year can also be sort of refocused in the context of what I've just explained. For example, we are negotiating a comprehensive tourism framework, of which Working Group 3 started last year. And as I wrote here, I think when we host ATCM 48 in Hiroshima in 2026, we should develop a working plan for 2026 and beyond. And in so doing, all we are discussing and all the kind of difficulties or divergences of views in those negotiations involves how to strike the balance between best available science on the one hand and precautionary approach on the other. And same can be said on the designation of Emperor Penguin as SPS 2. I believe what we should have in mind here is that we should really persevere in discussing sharing information each other, and continue to persuade each other with objective scientific expertise. And if the resistance or reticence of some parties derives not from the divergence in scientific assessment, but from other considerations such as political, geopolitical, economic, etc., etc. Such different considerations, I believe, can be detected through such intensive scientific dialogue, and they should be actually detected, I think, through such scientific dialogue. And if that is possible, we can exclude such non-scientific consideration from the forthcoming discussions. So, and for this reason, at least Japan believes that we should really persevere in intensive scientific dialogue, exchange of informations, in spite of the divergence of views or assessments among different parties. And when we have a closer look at all these three principles, at least I realized that the key to the achievement of all three of them is really the transparency. I refer to transparency in relation to the second principle, science-based international cooperation. And regarding the first principle of use for peaceful purposes, the transparency functions as a kind of safeguarding mutual trust and continuing peaceful and non-military use of the Antarctic continent. Once we start to hide or conceal informations, and the mutual distrust will genuinely propagate among the parties, which will deteriorate our mutual confidence, and might lead some parties to deploy some concealed, not necessarily military, but more political, geopolitical move on the Antarctica. So, which should be avoided, and to avoid that, securing transparency among the party is also important in relation to the first principle. So, on the regarding the third principle, I already mentioned the intensive scientific dialogue, which will necessarily involve the transparency in sharing scientific data, expertise, etc. So that is why transparency is important. And among some key issues discussed in Kochi, India last year, I referred to the exchange of information, and more specifically on the EIES. And we believe precisely for this reason, the discussions and the finalization of our EIS discussion is extremely important, which should strike the right balance between the sharing of broader information, scientific or non-scientific on the one hand, and not putting too much burden on those parties who are producing and sharing information on the other. Because if we put too much burden on the parties, those parties will be discouraged from precisely sharing information. And education and outreach activities is another important aspect in this context of transparency, which Japan, at least the foreign ministry, intends to really focus on and highlight, including the sharing and disseminating of the Japanese research or scientific activities outcome at this occasion. And lastly, a follow-up and implementation of other relevant outcomes. To put it shortly, we are aware of the resolutions or measures which have already been adopted in the past ATCM, but which have not yet entered into force. And in this respect, for Japan, definitely, as I put at the very last of this slide, we have the Annex 6 to the Environmental Protection Protocol as homework. And we are aware of that, and we have been working closely with the Ministry of Environment to realize at the same time the preparation of the draft amendment of the relevant legislations to put in place, implement this annex on the one hand, and submit to the National Diet the Annex 6 for approval. And as the Director General for International Legal Affairs Bureau, now I have to be in charge and work closely, even closely with the Ministry of Environment and Professor Takamura, who is here, to finalize and expedite the process. I will not enter into more details because the details will be discussed in the forthcoming panel discussions. But with this homework done or almost done, we would like to host successfully the ATCM 48 in Hiroshima. And that's all from me. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Doctor and Director General Nakamura. So we have about 15 minutes or so questions and answer time. And I know that the co-organizer, Dr. Yunchul Shin from KOPRI, has his comment and maybe perhaps a question to Director General Nakamura. So may I ask you to maybe start off the questions and answer time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think I can understand the general direction Japan will be taking next year. Can you elaborate a little further? Like, say Japan wants to do something symbolic and wants to do something practical and technical. Will there be some specific value or campaign or keywords that Japan will sell? And also, will there be some specific delivery items that you will present and illustrate in the Hiroshima ATCM?
Maybe should I answer right now? Yeah. Now, thank you very much for very important question, but at the same time, very challenging questions for me. Keywords, yes, but how can I say, provisionally, because as I've just left the position directly in charge of the Antarctic Treaty-related issues, I have to, how to say, hand over all these to my successors, who will, of course, further elaborate and think over again, and might change. But with that caveat, regarding the keywords, at this stage, I can say that back to the basics as well as transparency should be the keyword. And in this context, really international scientific cooperation will be highlighted And that's at this stage, at least, our intention. Regarding the symbolic events, outcomes, we want to do something, particularly in relation to other scientific bodies like of IPCC or Antarctic Council, or why not BBNJ if it enters into force. But for the reasons I've just explained, we cannot yet I was not able to make final decisions or definitive decisions in this respect. And we even have not yet secured necessary budgetary appropriation in this regard. So on the second part of your questions, we intend to think about something symbolic, but we cannot specify at this stage. That's the answer. So,
Joe, is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Nakamura-san, I'll actually elaborate a little bit further to challenge you. As one of the both the symbolic and maybe practical outcome of the ATCM 2026, a kind of Hiroshima declaration on something. Do you think that might be a potential outcome of the ATCM, Hiroshima ATCM?
Very good question. So, to be very straightforward, I'm not particularly in favor of put Japanese city name to either declaration or a statement, etc. So for very simple reason, because once we put any specific city name or country name to that declaration, it sometimes draws, how I say, excessive political interest, irrespective of the content. So that is why, at least as of myself is concerned, I tended to work more on the substance rather than to the title. Yeah, and with that said, so although I'm not sure whether that declaration or any outcome document will carry the name of Hiroshima or in which form, what seems to be sure, at least for me, is that there is a part carrying rather the message, and there would be another part, so which will further elaborate on more concrete, operational, or practical solution, at least practical advancement in discussions, consideration, working, etc., etc. And in which form, I cannot assure you, but so at least I would say there will be a message part, and which I think and I hope carry at least some of the messages I right now preliminarily elaborated on.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so the floor is maybe open for another comments or questions. And you have maybe, yes, we also have Jeffrey and maybe K.S. Would you like to take the first one? And maybe Professor Takamura also. Okay, so we'll take three of them. Thank you. So maybe K.S. first. Thank you.
Yes.
maybe for the first time in information. Professor K.S. Bastmeijer from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and the member of the Dutch delegation for the ATCM. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your inspiring presentation. I really find it inspiring because, as you explained, the global challenges are large, not only the geopolitical tensions, but also the global environmental changes. And as you explained well, these influence the Antarctic Treaty System functioning. So these are not in isolation, and the ATS is also not in isolation functioning of these tensions and these changes. And I personally fully agree that should actually bring us to the conviction that we need to go back to the basics and to actually emphasize the three pillars of the Antarctic Treaty system, the science and peace and environmental protection. The only question is how, because these challenges may also make that even more difficult, and that has been shown in the last about 3 ATCMs particularly. And then we can focus on the things that we are not in agreement of. We can also try to focus on building new things and in areas where we have agreement and where we actually can find each other in consensus. And that brings me to the framework on tourism. Of course, we hope, and quite a number of countries hope that we have a very constructive debate on that topic. But if I look at the last 2 years, I also see that constructive debate on that tourism dossier. And you have placed that topic in the third basic principle, environmental protection. I could also imagine that working together on that framework might help us to go back to the basics, not only for environmental protection, but also actually to the international cooperation and to emphasize the need to international cooperation in science and to use the best available science and leave space for the precautionary principle, etc. So my question is, would you do you think that working together in the coming years, including in the ATCM in Hiroshima, to work on that framework might help us actually to get back to that basics and to build trust again among the consultative parties, and also show the world that we are able to find consensus on a particular topic?
Yeah, thank you very much for actually very stimulating questions. At the onset, I have to admit that I'm not genuinely the expert in the tourism framework negotiation, so I don't know all the details which have involved historical backgrounds, context, etc. But with that said, my really initial and preliminary impression, being briefed from my team colleagues on the issue, is that precisely as you pointed out, I agree that this framework negotiation could be a good kind of litmus test for the Antarctic Treaty consultative parties' collective ability to work out something pragmatic, workable, which are solidly anchored to the basic pillars, principles of the Antarctic Treaty. And in order for us to be able to do this, Japan believes that here again, we should not kind of premeditate and predetermine the final outcomes of our outwork. For example, the legally binding measure is not the ironclad solution. Maybe we should really intensively discuss, taking into account the different viewpoints or different constraints of negotiating parties, and work out this a kind of sufficiently flexible framework or working guidelines, so which should allow kind of the different speed in changing behaviors, for example. In French word, a géométrie variable, and which could take the form not the measure, but rather in the form of guidelines or many or even several documents. And what I'm not telling that we should, how do I say, definitely opt for that options, but we should not exclude such options, and we should have always flexibility in our mind in crafting final outcomes on that discussions. Very preliminary, but that is the thought we are having on this issue.
Thank you. So can I go to Jeff McGee, professor at the University of Tasmania from Australia and a visiting professor at the KOPRI University. Maybe short, and because we have to finish in 7 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Shibata, and thank you, Director General Nakamura, for an insightful presentation, very stimulating thoughts. My question relates to your first back to basic, that is the peaceful use provisions in Article 1 of the treaty, and particularly the issue surrounding that of dual use equipment, that is equipment that can have a scientific purpose, but also perhaps be used for connection to military satellite systems, let's say. My question is the inspection mechanisms in Article 7, could they play a more extensive role in checking any slide towards militarization in that way? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for raising very important aspect. Again, my understanding of the issue is very preliminary and very rudimentary one. But with that said, I also believe that really the transparency is the key in this respect. And in the context of the transparency, I tend to agree what you've just pointed out, to allow the investigation kind of more kind of important role, or even further transparency, including whether such dual-use technology is not used for the military purpose in the Antarctica. So although that could involve different kinds of difficulties which have not existed before, etc., and which should be negotiated and should find solutions. But with that said, my basic instinct is to agree with him. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, Japan conducted only once previously in 2010, the inspection. Maybe it might be time to do the second time. A lot of work and a lot of money involved. Yes. Professor Takamura. Professor Yukari Takamura is professor at the University of Tokyo. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I personally very happy to have you, the Dr. and Director General Nakamura here. And as always, actually, my question is very much covered by the question by the Professor Bastmeijer and response from the Nakamura-san, so that I could stop here. But just if you could add something. My question is you already mentioned in your presentation that geopolitically speaking, that we are going to a little bit difficult and a complex situation, and even some possible, difficult relation even between the consultative parties. They are the major and big countries. So what will be the possible impact on the international regime as a whole, and specifically maybe in the Antarctic treaty negotiations? And I do agree that this ATCM discussion and progress in it, I think it's a kind of symbolic for the kind of litmus test, as you said, and the symbolic if we could succeed in the progress in this forum. Then I really encourage your comment I'm very much encouraged by your comment. But if you could add something, especially potential impact on the Antarctic Treaty negotiation.
Yeah. Thank you for, again, very important questions. I think our ministry's initial take about the impact you've just referred to is that it would impact Antarctic Treaty System if the situation is left as it is nothing is done. So that is why, at least I consider that we should really intentionally and kind of very deliberately go back to the basics and restate and re-emphasize against the pillars I've just explained, and reconfirm them among us. So if that is done, I believe that at least among consultative parties of the ATS, we can make it, and which will, I believe, mitigate the global instabilities. But we should do it right now and intentionally. That is my understanding.
Thank you very much. Your comments very much encourage us, and thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you again, Dr. and Director General Kazuhiko Nakamura, for your keynote and your very frank comments to our questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.